Hi, I'm Cathy Russ, Director of the Troy Public Library. Welcome to my new show, Conversations with Cathy, where I bring in interesting people who can inform the Troy community on any number of exciting topics. My guest today is Colin Wright. Colin is the minimalist author of over 30 books, the host of the Let's Know Things podcast, and the blogger behind Exile Lifestyle, as well as the co-founder of Asymmetrical Press. Colin, that is an awful lot going on, so let's break it down. You're the minimalist author of over 30 books. Does that mean you write very few words in your books?
just the right words, no more than that, the exact right number of words. No, I'm a minimalist in that I tend to try to focus on the important things, and so that applies to possessions, it also applies to the work that I do, the relationships that I have, trying to spend more of my time, energy, and resources on those most vital things, and less of my time, energy, and resources on the things that are less important to me personally, for my goals and my ambitions. So fortunately, that allows me to write as many words as I want because I free up a whole lot of time to sit around and just type all day.
So what are the important things?
It's going to be different for every single person. I think for most people, there will be some component of family, loved ones, significant others, things like that. For most people, there will be some component of being able to focus on oneself and to grow as an individual in as many different dimensions as you might think about for that, in terms of financial wealth, in terms of being a better and better, more refined version of yourself in terms of what you can do and your psychological well-being and happiness and fulfillment. And then in a lot of cases too, it's being able to contribute beyond yourself. It's figuring out how you can participate within society, within your community, things like that. But the specifics will vary greatly. And I would never try to tell anybody else what should be important for them because we're all very different people.
That is very interesting because I have always had the perception of minimalist more of perhaps an architectural style or a design style.
Yeah.
Clean lines, not a lot of furniture, no knickknacks, no books. I was actually talking to someone yesterday about this interview, and she said that she would be a minimalist if it weren't for the fact that she would have to get rid of all of her books.
No, you so keep the books
talk
if you
about
love them.
that.
Yeah, it's something that I usually tell people to illustrate that, because that is a misconception that is kind of, it comes tandem with the Instagrammable version of minimalism, where it's presenting minimalism as a collection of very expensive, very beautiful Scandinavian designed objects.
Yes.
You do not have to have stark white walls to be a minimalist. You don't have to wear a certain wardrobe. You don't have to, spend 10 times what most sane people would spend on your technology or furniture or anything. If your passion is unicorn statuettes, if nothing makes you happier in the world than unicorn statuettes, you should own a very nice collection of unicorn statuettes. Maybe don't buy the big screen TV that you never use. Don't spend the money on something that you're told you're supposed to want. Instead, spend it on the stuff that makes you happy, that you're passionate about. So get all the most beautiful unicorn statuettes, like a display case with spotlights on it. Like really spend your time, energy, and money on those unicorn statuettes. But focus it there where you know it will do the most good. So if you love your books, if books make you happy, if you love having a beautiful collection of books for yourself or to loan out to friends, whatever, that's exactly what you should be spending your money on.
Okay. Well, I don't know how you knew about my collection of unicorn statuettes, but
it's notorious. Yeah.
It is somewhat well known. It's on all the Pinterest boards. But so, tell us about the Exile Lifestyle. I have been given to understand that you travel around the country in an RV. So do you have a home or do you live in the RV?
Well, the RV is kind of a new thing. I'm just getting started on that. That is a component of a year-long tour that I'm on right now. And the repairs on the RV, getting it road ready, have taken a little bit longer than I suspected, which I think will be the case for a lot of the RV plans that I've made. But from September 2018 until September 2019, I'm traveling around North America in a Class A motorhome, a 33-foot 1985 Holiday Rambler Imperial.
Oh my goodness.
And that is going to be my home for a year. Learning to drive it has been quite a trick, and there's a lot of, no doubt, very valuable educational experiences ahead of me as a consequence. But for most of the last 10 years, since 2009, I've traveled full-time around the world, primarily to a new country every 4 months. and my readers vote on the country that I move to. So they choose the country, I choose the city, I go rent an apartment there, I live as much like a local as I'm able based on the location, and then I live there. I go to the grocery store, I make friends, build relationships, and I write and do my other projects. So travel has been a key component, but the specific type of travel has changed over the years.
So this is the Exile Lifestyle.
For me it is, yeah. I gave it a nice little rhyming name way back in the day when I started traveling.
Oh, it's great, it's catchy.
But since then I started to focus on more than just that on the blog Exile Lifestyle. I write about travel, but that for me is my passion. That is my unicorn statuette. That is what I spend my money on. And so I focus my time and attention and resources on that. But a lot of the writing is about self-fulfillment on a broader level. So it's about figuring out what makes you happy, what allows you to flourish in multiple different dimensions, and then trying to help people figure out what makes sense for them in terms of iterating forward to slowly but surely move themselves in a better and better direction for whatever that might mean for them, whatever the specifics of where they'd like to be, trying to help them get to that point.
So is that where the Asymmetrical Press comes in?
That was part of it, yeah. Asymmetrical Press is an indie publishing company that I started with a couple of friends of mine, Josh Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus, who run a website called The Minimalists.
Okay.
And we were, all three of us, making our living off of our books that we had produced independently and published independently, and we were able to make a living off of it. And that gave us a whole lot of freedom in terms of creative freedom, what we put out the door. There's not a lot of the traditional gatekeepers telling us what we could and could not publish, telling us what was popular and what would sell and what wouldn't. And we decided to work together to refine our process. One, to put out kind of an open source guide for other people to do the same thing if they wanted to. And then two, to try to leverage what we'd already built, the platforms and the reputation and stuff that we had built, in order to help other people who were perhaps not so good at marketing or who had no interest in running social media accounts or anything like that, that we had leveraged in order to publish and to make a living off of it, to help them publish through our publishing company as well. So we published our own work and continued to do so, and also for a long time we published a collection of, I want to say 8 or 10 other authors.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating to me because one of the debates in public libraries is whether or not to accept self-published works. And if yes, how do you draw the line, or how do you determine what is a quality self-published book versus something that maybe I printed in my basement that contains typos, or, you know, I am not a credible expert on that particular subject.
Yeah.
So how do you, especially when you're dealing with other authors, how do you determine who you're going to take on? And if you're not dealing with a traditional publishing company, who edits your work or makes suggestions if needed, or just make sure you don't have typos?
Yeah, that's a valuable discussion. There's a huge spectrum within the world of self-publishing. There's, on one side, what you might call vanity press,
yes,
if you're being polite about it. And then on the other side, there's stuff that is indistinguishable from what you would find from any of the big 5 publishers. A lot of what is written exists in between, and the difficult part is that you will find books that are not published well in the sense that they are low quality, or the editing is bad, they clearly haven't been worked through to get to the best possible form, but they're incredible books. And if they were just nudged a little bit further in this direction, they would be just phenomenal in terms of quality. And then on the other hand, you'll have like really terrible books that are polished up very nicely and they look like they're supposed to, but like nobody actually wants to read them, nobody's getting any value out of it. The nice thing about living today in the world of the future is that we have all kinds of technologies and resources that can help us get our book from over here to over here. You can hire editors quite easily by looking online. There's a bunch of different services that you can tap into to do that if you don't know somebody that you can hire already. There's a lot of tools that you can use, like Scrivener is my by far favorite piece of software for publishing. It works kind of like Microsoft Word, except you push a button and at the end it collects all of your stuff together and turns it into an EPUB or a Mobi file, a Kindle book, or a PDF that's suitable for using with CreateSpace or one of the other paperback publishers. So those types of tools are available. That's a $40 piece of software.
That is amazing.
And
I was not aware of that.
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
really cool.
And it opens up the space for a more diverse group of people, because traditional gatekeepers are great in that they can help filter out the stuff that's not well done, but it also filters out people who deserve to be published by a bunch of different metrics, just not the metrics that they're using. So we're getting a huge diversity of authors that we would not have heard from before as a consequence of these tools and technologies. So what we wanted to do with Asymmetrical was try to help people learn to use those tools. And a lot of the resources that we've put out have been oriented around that. Just free things that we published to help other people figure out how to use these tools so that they can get whatever they want to say out into the world.
Oh, that is fantastic. That is really fantastic, because traditional publishing is so difficult to break into. And it seems that their focus, I mean, they want literature, the good stories, but they want to make money too.
Yeah, yeah, and they have to. It makes sense. Yeah, it's a big bureaucracy, and that bureaucracy is not unnecessary. They do a lot of very valuable services. But I mean, they didn't reach out to me until I already showed that I had an audience.
Right.
And that's the way that it typically goes. They have to be a bit averse to risk. Just like with any big bureaucracy, they cannot afford to invest a bunch of money and time and resources into somebody who's not a sure thing. And so for better or worse, they are able to produce things that indies would have a difficult time producing, but they're also not able to produce a lot of the things that the indie publishing world can produce.
Well, let's back up a little bit, if you don't mind. When you started this, I guess if you could talk about marketing, or how did you reach so many people so you were able to be eventually scouted by the traditional publishers?
It took a long time, frankly. A lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of consistency. For me, it helped to put out a regular stream of books about a bunch of different things to kind of find my voice and get better and better. A big part of it, and something that's unavoidable, is really, really working hard and doing a lot of editing and trying to package your book nicely. That is something that even if you write the next great American novel, nobody will know if they don't want to pick it up.
Agreed.
And nobody will know if they haven't heard of you. And people are not going to just hear of you because you produced a nice book, unfortunately. There is no infrastructure for that. So in a lot of cases, what that means today is getting your name out either through traditional venues like speaking to audiences in public, which is not something, it's a completely different skill set from writing a good book, doing author signings, which also can be a completely different skill set, or posting stuff on social media. And you have to do it in such a way that it's not an advertisement. Nobody wants to follow you on Twitter if you're just a channel of commercials, essentially.
Or a flat page.
Exactly, yeah. And so there's a really difficult balance to strike. And that, unfortunately, too, working on social media can be a very different skill set as well. Not everybody takes it seriously. Not everybody is able to step away from the mental processes involved in creating an amazing book to try to create a much smaller, more concise version of the same, potentially to put online. But if you can get into that space and use your same voice and look at writing tweets as kind of like writing a book the size and scale of a fortune cookie, then you're in a really good spot, because you can communicate something of what people can expect from your book in tweet format or Facebook format or Instagram format, which is really great. But at the same time, there's still people who fall through the cracks because they cannot figure out a way to translate what works in one medium over to another medium. So for me, it's been just a matter of being vehicle agnostic and saying whatever the medium happens to be, if I can deliver information, if I can communicate through it, I'm going to try to learn how to do it. And that means email and text messages and tweets and Instagram, looking at each one as an opportunity to communicate in a different way.
It's almost like the tweet version of your book, the Facebook version of your book, the various forms of social media version of your book, and then the book. Yeah,
and it's figuring out what they're for. For me, I don't post a lot of long-form original pieces on Twitter. I mostly use it to learn, and so I try to share kind of a curated feed of the interesting things that I found elsewhere. And that's a very different use case than what I use Instagram for, which is typically to share images from places that I've been able to go to try to encourage people to travel and to visit places they wouldn't think to go. And then my books, I write fiction and nonfiction, so there's kind of different genres there, different specifics based on the genre. But each of these creatures is very different, and I had to approach each one and say, one, is this useful for me? Is this something that I'm just going to be shouting into the void and adding to the noise, or do I have something unique to offer here? And if so, then I try to take the time to learn how to use it well and try to figure out what value I'm actually putting into the world with this. And if I'm not, then I don't use it and I refocus on other things.
I would like to know more about your process of determining if you're shouting into the void, because I feel like so many of us shout into the void, or we should be more mindful about that. And if we were more mindful or more intentional about that and directed our efforts, our resources where they would perhaps see better effect. But what is a process for that? You could maybe tell us your process, but any general tips?
Yeah, and the difficult thing about it is that in most cases, if you are being careful with the way that you use social media, it means deleting 99% of what you're thinking of putting out there. And so if you are immediately responding, if you're like quick twitch tweeting, like just immediately shouting outbursts into the void,
in all caps,
that's probably not useful to anyone but you. If it's useful to you, okay, fine. It's cheaper than psychology or going to a psychiatrist, but
perhaps not as effective.
But not as effective, perhaps. But typically, what it means is honing. Just like you would write a book and not just publish every chapter, you type it out and then you're done. You go through several iterations. You have other people look at it. Maybe you don't have other people look at your tweets first, but you do stop and think about it. You think, what am I conveying here? What am I showing? That helps make sure that you're communicating a consistent message. So you're talking about something that makes sense coming from you, and then people can look at that and then understand what it is that you do more holistically. So
okay.
if this person's tweeting about this thing, that probably gives me some indication of what they write about in their books. It's very, very easy, though, to fall into the reflexive communication thing because we're encouraged to do it. Every single social network in particular out there is encouraging us to interact with that social network all day, every day, constantly. And that is a time suck, but it's also something that makes us very thoughtless in the way that we communicate.
So in other words, just to kind of knee-jerk, yeah, me too,
yeah.
Or I agree, or no, you're wrong, or just comments that really don't contribute anything, but you feel maybe good in the moment because you've said something.
Yeah, exactly. There's actually been a lot of great research done that shows why social media is so effective at like soaking up all of our time and attention and energy and making us feel bad as a consequence, because they're able to use what is often called dark patterns. It's really just very clever uses of user interfaces, buttons and colors and notifications and things like that, that encourage us to check in, but it also calls our attention away from other things. Mm-hmm. If we go and do something else, our phone shouts for our attention from across the room, and because somebody liked something. Mm-hmm. You know, and then we have to go in and check what it was, and it gets to the point where we are rewarded with little bursts of dopamine.
Yes.
Every time we see that little red circle, we see some kind of indication that somebody is checking in, somebody is commenting or liking something that we posted, somebody wrote a comment, and that over time kind of trains our dopamine systems to respond to those types of quick victories, those little candy bars of nourishment, rather than looking for the stuff that would be more nourishing, the stuff that maybe takes a little bit more work, the stuff that is a more complete, more healthful sense of happiness, rather than those quick twitch bursts of dopamine. And it's difficult to extract yourself from that cycle once you've gotten into it. I mean, we were all kind of thrown these amazing devices, these smartphones, and all the technologies built into them. They are incredible. These are incredibly useful tools if we use them right. But we were all handed them sometime within the last decade or so and never given instructions on how to use it correctly. And even the people building it didn't really know how to use it well as they were building it. And nobody involved in these systems are evil. They're not trying to hurt us. It's just that the incentives in place do tend to make us respond very quickly and very emotionally and with outrage and things like that, as opposed to thoughtful reflection and anything that represents us as individual human beings.
So for your social media time, do you limit yourself to a certain amount of time per day? Do you thoughtfully respond when you receive a notification, or how do you manage this? Because you have a large social media presence, and so for you, because this is a big part of what you do, how do you manage that?
Very carefully.
Yeah.
I try to watch my own behaviors, so if I start to get sucked into it too frequently, or if I do start to feel compelled to check it every 5 minutes or something, then I step away from it for a time. In general, though, what works really well for me, because the tools on my smartphone, I love my smartphone. It is such an incredibly useful device. But I keep all of the notifications turned off. so that it can never shout out for attention. It can never beg to be held. If I'm doing something else, I can focus on that other thing. And that means when I pick it up to use it, I can go through and check some stuff, and I can check my email, and I can check my social network, and spend 10 minutes on it of focused attention, and then set it aside, and then go off and do other things. And research has shown that actually anytime you get distracted from something that you're focusing on, it takes you about, on average, 20 minutes to get back into the flow of what you were doing before. So if you're checking your phone every 20 minutes, you're never actually getting into the flow state that you could be in
I would agree
everything
with
else that you're working on.
Wholeheartedly.
Yeah, so to me, social media, if you treat it as that type of responsibility, something that you're doing with a purpose, something that is purposeful rather than something to distract you from everything else, you tend to use it a lot better and more intentionally, but it's also something that doesn't distract you quite so much from everything else that is also important in your life that you want to be doing.
So I want to step back even further, because we've talked about a little bit about the books and a little bit about traveling, but where did this all start with you? When you were 10 or 12 or 15, did you say, hey, you know what I want to do? I want to travel the country and be a minimalist. How did you even come up with this idea? Because in my opinion, it's unique. I have not heard of anyone who does what you do. So I think that as perhaps an inspiration for people to live out their passions or live what they want to do, tell us some more about your inspiration.
Definitely didn't start when I was young. I wanted to be like a comic book artist or a professional video game player, which wasn't really a thing back then, but I wanted to. It came to be, this version, this concept, it came to be when I was living in LA. So after I went to school, I graduated with a degree in graphic design and illustration, segued into running a branding studio out in Los Angeles. And it went very, very well by certain metrics, very professionally successful, but every other aspect of my life was sacrificed in that trade-off. And it was fortuitous, a couple of circumstances aligned that I was able to recognize that in the right moment when I was actually considering things and thinking it through. And I realized that I was putting off this dream that I'd always had. The reason that I was telling myself in the back of my mind that I was working so hard and sacrificing so much to run this business was that I needed to earn tons of money so I could go travel.
Okay.
And that perception, I grew up in the Midwest, grew up in Missouri. It's actually a lot more expensive to travel from the Midwest than it is from the coast. So my perception of travel as somebody who had never traveled was that you had to be a millionaire in order to do it. That was the only thing that made sense to me. So I was working and working and working and giving up my health and my relationships and everything else to try to earn that money so I could go out and learn. Learning is so vitally important to me. It's a huge focus of everything that I do in my life. And I was becoming increasingly aware that there are these great big gaping voids in my mental knowledge web that I could only fill in by going to other countries, seeing the world from different perspectives for a while. And yet, here I was living in LA, and I had more money than I'd ever made in my entire life, and I still had a blank passport. I was not prioritizing my priorities. So having that recognition, having that moment of clarity, I decided that I was going to change things. And I set myself a deadline, and leading up to that deadline, which was 4 months in the future, I got rid of everything that I owned that wouldn't fit into a carry-on bag. Kind of became an accidental minimalist at first because everything else was standing in my way, and I would literally have to pay rent for it if I wasn't taking it with me, pay rent for my stuff to sit in an empty apartment. And then I hit the road and I started traveling. That was in 2009. And the structure of that lifestyle and everything else kind of fell into place during that lead-up period. And then once I got on the road, I started writing books professionally the year after that. And leading up to that point, I still did consulting.
I feel like that's the title. We've hit upon the title of your autobiography, The Accidental Minimalist. So right here first, folks. But going back to your concept of traveling too and having a lot of money, you probably also thought you had to travel in a certain way, staying in hotels and doing all the tourist things and needing the money to even have a traveling lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell us how you travel.
Very low budget.
Hostels, or where do you stay?
Typically these days I rent an apartment wherever I go if I'm staying for long enough, and if not that, then I'll rent an Airbnb or something. I like to have my own space, and I like to have my space in a place where people actually live.
Okay.
Outside of the tourism district where everything will cost 4 times as much and will be kind of a theme park version of what the actual culture is like. I'd like to try to live with locals and meet actual people with whom I can build relationships that are not predicated on money and buying something or selling something. That's my preference. Different people have different preferences. Typically, the model of travel that we're sold on, though, is not the only model. And nothing against anybody who likes the high-end luxury, like going and racing yachts and staying in 5-star hotels. If that's your thing, awesome, that's great. That's not my thing. And what I really wanted to get out of the situation, I came to learn, was something that was actually relatively inexpensive. And my entire lifestyle today, and this has been the case since I started traveling, all inclusive, from rent to food to healthcare to everything else, travel, all the tickets, all the expenses, costs less than my rent cost alone in LA.
Really?
So I save money by living this way compared to how I was living before. And for a lot of people, as long as you home in on what you actually want out of the circumstances, be it travel or some other type of lifestyle pivot that you're planning on making, typically, if you really focus on that and don't add in a bunch of superfluous stuff that you don't actually need, that other people tell you you're supposed to want but you don't actually need, you can reduce your expenses in that way. And then some very unthinkable things actually become thinkable.
What just occurred to me is the only bill that you probably have is your cell phone bill or internet access, and with paying bills online, you don't need an address.
Yeah, yeah. And so in between, typically, I can scale down or scale up based on what I want. So when I go live in a place for 4 months, typically I do have rent to pay and sometimes utilities and things like that based on where I'm renting. But because I'm able to kind of pick and choose and then change things 4 months later, it's not a consistent expense. I can change it later if I want to. I can spend more next time, less next time. I can scale up, scale down. I can get an RV and make a great big upfront purchase, but then I can scale down my expenses, hopefully, for the remainder of that year that I'm living in it by staying at different parks and boondocking when I want to and having some rent, no rent, low rent, high rent, whatever. So you can definitely rethink these things, and the guides and the maps and the templates that we're handed are not the only ones that we have access to. It's a lot more difficult to make your own, to write your own instruction booklet because nobody else has done it before, but that to me is one of the better ways to build a lifestyle that is custom tailored to you and exactly what you want, rather than something that kind of sort of fits but doesn't really.
But not quite.
Yeah.
So you've been in Troy now for just over 24 hours?
Yeah, just a couple of days.
So, so what have you seen in Troy or the Detroit area? Have you had a chance to go around? Any local spots that you've sampled that you particularly liked?
Yeah, not on this trip. I've been out to a couple of restaurants, which have been really nice. Went to a bakery this morning. Went to a place called Sedona, I believe, last night, which was really nice. On previous trips, I've spent a lot more time in the Detroit metro area and been to a couple of museums and is the conservatory there, the big greenhouse, the
Belle Isle Conservatory,
gorgeous. Things like that are typically where I spend my time. When I arrive in a new place, one of the first things I do is map out all the museums, and then kind of start to schedule dates for going to those. And then in between, I'll stop off at different restaurants and cafes and get coffee and things like that.
And then, so do you just kind of take in the local environment, take in the atmosphere? You know, see kind of who we are here in Troy, Michigan, and what's going on?
Exactly. And ideally, like my ideal travel situation is going to a place and staying like a month at least. So I only have a few days this time around, but I do have some time set aside so I can meander about and take a walk and check out some things without any particular goal in mind. And that type of meandering exploration is where I tend to get the most value.
And then this will eventually turn up perhaps in a book.
It could, yeah, you never know.
All right. So before we close, I want to ask you one more thing, and that is you've done some TED Talks.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy those? Do you feel pressured because of the TED Talk name? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then maybe tell us what your favorite one that you've done so far has been.
Yeah, it's fun. I enjoy it. It's nerve-wracking every time. Any talk can be nerve-wracking. There's a biological.
Not this talk.
Not this one. This one's super chilled out. But any talk can be, because you're doing something that biology doesn't want you to do. You are standing in lights in front of a bunch of strange creatures that you don't know if there's any threats or opportunities out there. It's not something that the human body wants you to do. But
and we're all staring at you.
Exactly, and waiting for you to fail, at least in your own mind. And in reality, it's the opposite, thankfully. Most people want you to succeed, and people really do well by you when you're up on stage if you allow yourself to pay attention to that. But yeah, in general now, there's nothing more than the basic biological fears to kind of push down with those talks. The early talks definitely were super nerve-wracking. And the very first TED Talk I ever gave was in Phnom Penh, Cambodia.
Oh my goodness.
And I was super sick. I had kind of a very, very low level of food poisoning from some street food I had eaten, and I had crazy allergies going on, and I had a throat infection. And the only way I managed to make it through was stopping at what they call a roadside pharmacy. I had to take a rickshaw across town over this little expanse of like agricultural dirt road. And there's a dude with a table on the side of the road with a bunch of unmarked boxes full of medications, and I just went up to him and kind of went like this, signaling that my throat was messed up. He gave me 4 different medicines. I took one of each, and that got me through the talk. Definitely crashed that night after all was said and done. But that was the most nerve-wracking one, and getting that out of the way first, having that type of situation, made the ones that came after it all the easier because I didn't have to deal with that.
That sets the bar pretty high on a bad day.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Oh gosh, I want to hear more about that story at some point, but I think we're coming to the end. So Colin, if our viewers would like to know more about you, more about what you do, I have a copy of your book, which is called, your most recent book, Becoming Who We Need to Be. And it says a book about the challenges we face as individuals, as societies, and becoming who we need to be to face them. So if you just don't mind telling us where we can find you to learn even more.
The easiest place to start is to go to colin.io, which is where I have all of my books and other projects. My blog is exilelifestyle.com. My podcast is called Let's Know Things. And then people can find me on social media if they want to, if that fits into their schedule and they're using it intentionally, at Colin is my name.
Colin is my name.
Colin is my name.
I like that. I like the accidental minimalist. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I so appreciate it. And I am going to do some soul searching on what I can get rid of and how I can live more intentionally and not shout into the void. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Keep those unicorn statuettes.
Well, I will never give up my unicorn statuettes. So thank you all so much for joining us here on Conversations with Cathy. I look forward to seeing you again on our next conversation. Have a great day.